This is Trinity Storm and you are watching ninth and final part of What If Naruto Was Bastard Son of Minato. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share and subscribe to the channel. Now wasting no more time, let's start the story.
The scrolls Naruto had sent throughout the elemental countries had silenced the people. As the news of what they had heard sunk in, so many thoughts raced through their heads. Hearing that Minato Namikaze not only ordered the slaughter of orphan children, but had abandoned his one flesh and blood before he was even born was far more heinous than anything else he could have done. Sure, the man was despised by the people of Iwa because he had slaughtered their shinobi, but it was war, and people died in war. This was simply the behavior of a man who had clearly lost his mind. Many of the people of Iwa were experiencing conflicting emotions right now. A large portion of the village had lost loved ones to Konoha's forces during the Third Shinobi War, many of them at the hands of Minato himself. So it was a shock to learn that the man they had accepted as one of their own was related to their village's worst enemy. Their deep hatred for the man initially fueled their rage to the point where they almost wanted to kill the young man in order to end the bloodline of Minato, but they stopped as rationality returned. Naruto had never attacked their home, and had not only saved Onoki and his granddaughter before they ever met the man, but he had also come and visited them without any ill will or hatred. He had healed those who paid for it without prejudice, and it was then that they remembered how the man had openly denounced the name Namikaze because he himself had never been accepted as one because he had been abandoned before birth and wanted nothing to do with a man who would order the deaths of so many innocent children. So, while they were initially outraged by the truth, it gradually faded because the boy was not his father because he chose to heal instead of mass murdering people. While Kiri could have argued that point given that his attack on their forces wiped out their forces to the point where Kiri was no longer even a shinobi village, as I said, it wasn't around anymore to complain. As word spread, those in power began to cut all ties with Konoha, as well as Fire Country. They didn't explain why because they didn't want to talk about it, all of them assuming that the same one who sent the scrolls about the tragedy would deal with it, and they would not deny the young man his vengeance. Konoha's economy suffered as a result of so many people ceasing to trade with them, and no one gave Minato any explanation as to why this was happening. He had Jiraiya use his spy network to try and find answers to their problems, but by the time they returned with an answer, it would have been too late. The Fire Daimyo had almost demanded an explanation for why his country was suffering so much, because he had no idea what the hell was going on. He was attempting to use informats in the same manner as Jiraiya to obtain the information he required, but even his own sources were slow. He finally got his answers from Naruto, who appeared in front of the man and explained why the rest of the world was against them. The daimyos were doing this to force the Fire Daimyo to take action against Minato in such a way that he couldn't find a middle ground. There was no gray area in this matter because he would either support the man's actions in mass murdering orphans or order the man to pay for his heinous actions. This demonstrated Naruto's power in the world, as he was able to persuade so many people to do this. Even though he was a well-known doctor, this was not something that just anyone could do. The Fire Daimyo listened as Naruto described the horrific things he had witnessed that day. He didn't hold back, even showing the man the evidence he had, which made the Fire Daimyo puke because he didn't have the stomach to see such a thing. Despite the fact that the man nearly begged Naruto to stop showing him the truth, Naruto did not stop. In the end, the Fire Daimyo was enraged by Minato's actions. When Naruto saw the man in this condition, he finally asked the Fire Daimyo his one request. "Let me be the one to take the man's life." The Fire Daimyo was surprised to learn that Naruto wanted to play the role of executioner, given his previous occupation as a doctor. However, the man eventually agreed because Naruto had shown him the reason for the sudden loss of trade with everyone else. As he walked away, Naruto pulled out a scroll, one of the many he had written to spread the truth to everyone in power, and tossed it to the Fire Daimyo. He told the man to read it and then he left through a summoned door before the Fire Daimyo could say anything else. He read the scroll Naruto had tossed to him, and as Naruto had said, he completely understood the reasoning behind his hatred for the man. However, It appears that the fire daimyo owed Naruto a huge favor because he had apparently done something that he himself had been trying to deal with for years. The Kan family had been a thorn in his father's and grandfather's sides before it became a problem for him as the daimyo of Fire Country. They were greedy, narcissistic, and used numerous illegal methods to obtain what they desired in life, but they did so in such a way that no one could trace it back to them, so they couldn't do anything about it. Even if they had, the loss of their family would have left a significant hole in the economy to fill. They became so egotistical with their egos that the head of their family was basically proposing, and by that I mean attempting to blackmail, that his son and Azula marry. And the fire daimyo would never do something like that because he didn't want his family to be associated with theirs. But Naruto, who he knew had something to do with it because the scroll explained he was the son of their disowned daughter Mocha, had apparently found a way to eliminate them in such a way that many of the families that the Kan had spent so long destroying had been able to rebuild themselves back to nearly their former glory when they reclaimed their stolen wealth. As a result, their economy was not as adversely affected as he had anticipated. So, because the boy had been a true blessing in dealing with that major thorn in his side, he would grant the boy the authority to end the life of the man who had taken so much from him. With that in mind, the fire daimyo summoned his guards and personally left for Konoha to ensure that the man was imprisoned until Naruto could deal with him. All the while, Minato was growing increasingly enraged that the men he had sent to do the deed had not returned and reported that they had been successful. For Kami's sake, they were children. How difficult could it be to murder them? But what made it worse was that he had to suffer significant financial losses not only for the village for reasons he was still unsure of, but Jiraiya was out and about looking for answers, but also for personal reasons. Because their accounts merged when they married, the majority of the money he had access to came from his wife. But now that the divorce was finalized, Kushina took all of her money from it. What made matters worse was that 98% of the money in the account was hers because, as the now last Uzumaki, she had been given sole ownership of her homeland, the island country of Whirlpool. The massive amount of riches she received from there alone meant she was set for life, and given her massive wealth, she was in no way in any sort of financial straits. Minato had tried to talk to her, to try to mend things between the two of them, but she would always glare at him and refuse to speak to him. But she did always smile a little, which was a little unsettling, as if she knew something bad was going to happen to him and couldn't wait to see it happen. This irritated him enough, but what aggravated him even more was the fact that he saw her with another man as she went out late for drinks. This harmed his self-esteem as a man, which only fueled his rage. This exacerbated his already deteriorating sanity, and he was waiting for his remaining root members to return so that he could use them to eliminate any and all people Kushina chose to date. In his mind, she was his, and it was either him or no one, and because she was the last of her clan, she would become desperate to have another child as soon as possible in order to continue the family lineage. But, as he was hatching schemes to entice his now ex-wife to return to him, one of his scouts came in and informed him that the fire daimyo was on his way and was about a day's ride away from the village. Minato raised an eyebrow because he had received no news or even a scroll stating that the man was going to arrive ahead of time. This either meant he was here for a surprise inspection, as his father had done with Hiruzen when he was Hokage or his grandfather had done with Hashirama, or he was coming to employ them to investigate the cause of the sudden loss of trade with almost everyone. The good thing about the second one was that he was currently investigating why the trade had ceased, so he could at least tell the fire daimyo he was working on at the time. As the fire daimyo arrived the next day and entered Minato's office, he had no reason to suspect anything. Minato had gotten out of his chair to greet the man and shake his hand as was customary with a courteous bow, but the second he went to extend his hand out towards the fire daimyo, he was slapped with a pair of chakra-suppressing cuffs. Minato was exhausted, but he was even more enraged by what had just happened because it was so unexpected. Before the fire daimyo could say anything, he ordered his men to bind Minato, which they did, much to his chagrin. Only after the man was securely bound in place on his knees was he informed that he was being detained. Minato's face turned pale as he heard this, but it darkened even more when he learned why. Because of the seals on their tongue, the root shinobi should not have been able to turn on him. It was only then that Kushina's smirk returned to him. The Uzumaki were known for their mastery of seals, and knowing Naruto had already set him up in such a way that Kushina learned of his infidelity, he wouldn't be surprised if he asked Kushina to assist him in removing the seals on a root member or two. Minato tried to open his mouth to plead his case, but the fire daimyo didn't want to hear it and ordered his mouth gagged because there was no justification for such actions against children. Even if they had been at war, it would not have been right because they were not allied with any village and were simply surviving to make a life for themselves later with the help of Naruto, a man who knew what it was like to grow up without parents. Minato screamed in frustration as he tried in vain to break free from his shackles. He would have used the Hiroshin because he had plenty of them set up for emergencies, but the chakra suppression cuffs prevented him from doing so. The man was dragged out in front of everyone, who had gathered to see why he was being arrested by the fire daimyo of all people. The guards dragged him to the center of town, where the men who had been sent there had set up a makeshift stage for the fire daimyo to address the crowd. Once there were enough witnesses, the fire daimyo read off the charges against Minato, which many people initially dismissed as false, but as he read on, their opinions began to shift quickly. They were informed that Minato's actions had resulted in the loss of trade between their country and the others. To emphasize the point, the fire daimyo pulled out various images of the slaughtered children and threw them into the crowd, allowing everyone to see what the man had ordered done. And it was then that their perceptions of the man were completely shattered, with the masses demanding his blood. So, after hearing the people's demand for his immediate execution, the fire daimyo delivered his verdict on Minato, and it was death. Minato's eyes widened in horror as he realized he had lost the second-to-last thing he had in the form of his public image in this manner. And as he was being dragged away towards the prison cell where he would remain until his execution, he noticed Kushina smirking at him in the crowd and roared angrily as loud as his muffled mouth could at her. But, as he did so, something came to mind. The letter had concluded with the following lines. I have taken one of the three things you value the most from you, and I assure you that the second is close behind. And soon the third will be gone as well. His eyes widened once more in recognition. Naruto had predicted that he would go off the deep end and do something drastic to force him to submit. He had been waiting for something like this to happen to expose him and turn the people against him. And, like the idiot he was, he had fallen for the trap yet again, and now he would pay the price. Several days later, the news of Minato's arrest and the fire daimyo's decision to execute the man spread quickly throughout the elemental continent. Many people were relieved to hear this because, based on what they had heard or seen in the pictures Naruto had sent out, the man deserved to die, and it was only unfortunate that he could only die once. It would have been possible to make him suffer even more than that, but what could you do? The man's execution date was set, and many of those who despised Minato for one reason or another flocked to Konoha to witness his demise. It had taken a long time in their books, but it would be well worth the wait. But, while they were all doing that, Naruto received a letter from the fire daimyo, in which he expressed his heartfelt regret for what had happened to him and the children he had done so much for. The date of the man's execution was written on the scroll, and Naruto smirked because the day had finally come for him to end the man who had thought him worthless or at best a tool to be made subservient when he actually became something. Naruto then immediately aided the man who had brought the note to him, as the man had been running nearly non-stop and appeared to be on the verge of collapsing. After about 20 minutes of medical attention, the man was fine and able to return home without fear of suffering a heart attack, but Naruto did tell him to stop smoking because it was causing problems with his lungs and would lead to problems later if he didn't. Sure, Naruto smoked from time to time, but it was mostly to relax his nerves. Heavy smokers did it due to addiction. He did not suffer from this because his blood filtered the nicotine, so he did not experience the side effects. But now that the day had come for Minato's execution, he went home and got Haku, who also wanted to see it because she now knew the truth about his past. She wanted to be there to support him in this pivotal moment in his life, and with a quick kiss on the lips, she demonstrated that she would be there for him always. Naruto smiled as the two of them exited the door and walked towards Konoha's front gates. After an hour, Minato was led from his cell to the arena where his execution was to take place, all the while wanting to fight but lacking the energy to do so because, while imprisoned, he had been given nothing to drink or eat to keep his strength up. They eventually made it to the center of the arena, where a post had been placed dead center within it. He was bound there, his hands behind his back, and he could see the many people who had come to see him die today. He didn't recognize many of the people in the crowd, but he did recognize Onoki and the Raikage. He could only growl in rage that they would be able to see him die this way rather than in battle, as he would have preferred. But now that Minato was bound there, he wondered where the executioner was because no one else was in the arena with him. While the various people sat in the stands, the fire daimyo and a few others were in the area reserved for them. So, who would be the one to actually murder him? He received his response a few minutes later, and Dear Kami enraged him like nothing else had before. Naruto had entered the arena through a door, and as soon as he made his presence known, the crowd stopped booing Minato and began to cheer for Naruto. Regardless, Naruto paid no attention to their applause because he wasn't doing this for their approval or anything. He wasn't doing it for the fame of killing the man to boost his reputation or anything. This was pure, unadulterated vengeance, long in the making. But, contrary to popular belief, Naruto did not proceed with the execution, albeit in a painful manner given the rumors about what he did to those who irritated him, and Minato was the epitome of that very type of person. He actually broke a large circular vial of blood in his hand as the first thing he did. He then used his blood to flow down his cane and take the shape of a shovel. Many people wondered what he was going to do with it, but they all kept an eye on him because the answers to their questions would be revealed soon enough. He stopped a few yards short of Minato and began digging into the ground after forming the shovel. Minato's brow furrowed in perplexity because Naruto's actions made no sense to him. Was the brat planning on burying him alive or something? I see you're perplexed, Naruto said simply, pausing shoveling for a moment to speak to Minato, and while you may not be able to say such a thing or even ask why I'm doing this given you're gagged, I understand that look. So please allow me to respond to your unasked question, which is clearly on your mind. I'm preparing a grave for you. And, as much as I despise you, you did provide half of the genetic material for my existence. So, in exchange for the one good thing you did for me in my entire life, I'll dig you a grave instead of throwing your body out for animals to eat. You should be grateful for that. Minato grumbled angrily as he watched Naruto resume his digging. True, he could have done this much more quickly with a room set up, but this was a moment he wanted to savor. The man was going to die regardless of what happened, so why hurry? He finished digging the hole after a few minutes and jumped out before absorbing the blood that he had used to make the shovel. The dirt was filtered out because it couldn't enter the pores, and he spat it back into the same vial he had crushed to get the blood. Well, Naruto said solemnly, here we are at this point in time. I must say that your actions assailed me by ordering the snuffing out of so many lives. While I knew you'd do something in retaliation, I had no idea how much of one you had planned. I just have to wonder why. What could you possibly have expected as a result of your actions? Naruto sighed to himself after about 10 seconds of listening to Minato's muffled words. Well, I can't get the answers I'm looking for with you gagged, can I? Said Naruto, twitching his finger slightly. The wire connected to that gloved finger easily cut the side of the gag, allowing Minato to spit it out and express himself. Do you have any idea? Minato began, but he couldn't continue because Naruto held out his hand and was using multiple wires to constrict Minato's throat, preventing him from speaking. If all you're going to do is throw insults or statements about me doing things I shouldn't have done because of your vanity, like the cliché villain you are, Naruto said solemnly because this was no laughing matter, then I'm not going to let you speak because I neither care nor want to hear it. He then retracted the wires from the man's throat, which caused Minato to cough because he couldn't breathe with them wrapped around his throat like that. Skipping all the hate-filled dialogue between us, Naruto said, Wanting to keep this conversation brief and to the point, why did you order the deaths of so many children? What could you possibly expect as the end result? I wanted to make you suffer, Minato said weakly, because you've done so much and ruined so many of my plans. To top it all off, you murdered my daughter. So you think your daughter's life is worth the lives of nearly 1,000 children? With a raised brow, Naruto inquired. You're damn right, I do. Raged Minato. He didn't care to remain silent on the subject at this point because he had already been sentenced to death. What else could they do to him? My daughter was a kunoichi prodigy. Those bratwursts were worthless. They were no shinobi. Just because they weren't in the profession you saw as the only thing worth a damn, Naruto began, leaning on his cane, doesn't make their lives any less valuable than anyone else's. And, despite putting your own daughter on a pedestal, honestly believing that she was a gift to the people of Konoha, a gift that came from your genetics, you abandoned me, the other child born with the same genetics. That says a lot about your personality. So, what the fuck do you want from me, brat? Minato spit venomously. An apology? An apology, Naruto said, just before bursting out laughing because that was a funny response to hear out of the blue like that. No. If I wanted that, Minato, I wouldn't have done even half of what I did to you. It's strange how you saw me as worthless, yet I managed to murder your daughter. That just goes to show how bad your judgment is, and I'd tell you to work on it, but you're not going to live past today, so that advice is pointless. So, what exactly do you want from me? Minato inquired, eager for this to be over. If he was going to be killed, then just do it. Well, that is quite simple to explain, Naruto said as he walked forward, placing a scroll and a vial of bluish-orange liquid in front of Minato before stepping away from him. You see, I had intended to simply kill you and be done with it, but as a man with an inquisitive mind, I found myself in the ideal situation to answer a hypothetical question that has been bothering me for years. And just what the hell is going on in that mind of yours? Minato asked sarcastically because, to be honest, he didn't want to hear it. My question was who was stronger between the two of us, Naruto stated simply, because we both did so much to earn a reputation that makes us feared within the shinobi system, with the only discernible difference being that I am not a shinobi. So what I want to do is confront you at your peak performance right now in order to get an answer to my question. And what if I don't want to dance to your music? Scoffed Minato. Come on, Naruto chuckled, a man with your ego? Not like this, you're the type of person who wanted to go out fighting. So why not have a fight to the death like I am offering? At the very least, you'll have a chance to kill me instead of dying on your knees like the dog you are. Minato looked at Naruto with all of his rage visible in his eyes. I'm going to take your murderous look as a yes, Naruto chuckled, so I'm going to cut you loose and you'll drink the vial in front of you. It's not poison or anything like that, because that would defeat the purpose of my fighting you. It will restore you to your original condition, allowing you to fight me at full strength, while the scroll I placed there is the kunai you used to make such a name for yourself. I can't possibly fight the Yellow Flash if he can't use his signature weapon, can I? When Naruto swiped his hand down, the wires cut the ropes that bound Minato to the post and shredded the pole itself into splinters. Minato stumbled forward, still weak from a lack of food and water. While his first thought was to throw the vial away to spite Naruto, he couldn't deny that he was far too weak to be a threat to anyone right now. He reluctantly uncorked the vial and tipped his head back to drink the contents. As soon as he drank it, he started coughing in pain, as if his body was on fire. He assumed he had drank poison at first, but the pain subsided quickly and he felt as if he had slept for an entire week with all the energy to back it up. He then took up the scroll Naruto had left him and unsealed his tri-pronged kunai before placing them in the pouch he had used to store them, which was also sealed in the scroll. Now that you're nice and artificially rested, Naruto said, please attack as soon as possible because my life isn't doomed to end today if I win. Naruto then snapped his fingers and mumbled, room, to create one that encircled the entire arena. The people in the stands were not within it, but many wondered what this strange bubble was, including Minato, who wasn't given much time to argue or get an answer. He would do everything in his power right now to kill this brat who had brought down everything he had spent most of his life building. This brat had destroyed everything, from his reputation to his family. From the stands, everyone was holding their breath, waiting to see who would make the first move. Plenty of people questioned why Naruto was giving Minato a chance to fight back like this, but to be honest they were curious as to see who would win this fight between the two of them, so they would watch regardless. Minato was the one who made the first move, throwing a kunai into Naruto's heart and using the Hiraishin to teleport up close and personal faster than most people could see. He knew from the Chunin exams that Naruto used wires, so long distance was out if he wanted to win this. Despite pulling out another kunai to stab the boy in the neck, Naruto grabbed his face and slammed it into the ground hard enough to crack it. What made it worse was that Naruto had combined his steel release with a scorch release to accelerate the attack by having the explosive jets of flame act as an accelerant, making the attack stronger than it would normally be. The people heard the crunch of bones breaking, which Naruto assumed was the front of his skull as well as his nose. But he wasn't finished yet, as he lifted Minato by the head because the man was in a coma from the concussive blow to the head, and used the explosive release to blast the man straight out of his hand. Minato screamed in agony as he felt his face almost burn off as he tried in vain to soothe the pain with his hands. The pain eventually subsided, but it was due to Naruto pulling out a syringe containing the same liquid he had given Minato to heal the first time, but this time it was in a syringe that he threw into Minato before stomping hard on the plunger, causing it to inject itself into the man. The concoction restored the man to his prime, and Minato was soon back on his feet. "You don't get to die so easily," Naruto pointed out, "because you get to pay for the lives you ordered snuffed out in some vain and idiotic attempt to control me." "What the hell did you do to me?" Minato wondered, understandably perplexed as to how he had suddenly been healed. "I just injected you with a failed product of my research," Naruto explained simply, "because what it was supposed to be was a sort of cure-all type of medicine I was hoping to develop so that I could help people at a low cost so they didn't have to pay for expensive surgery. Regardless of what I tried, it was a failure, and the project was abandoned." "Well, it appears to have worked perfectly for me, brat," Minato said. "Oh," Naruto chuckled, "it would appear that way, but you'd be surprised at the reality of your situation right now. But enough of that. I believe we are still fighting for our lives here." Minato was enraged that his opponent was acting so casually about the whole thing, as if Minato himself was a joke and not even a challenge. He'd make the brat regret his actions in front of everyone. So he used the appropriate hand signs to summon multiple stone pillars all around the arena. He threw the majority of his tri-pronged kunai into the air after they sprouted, causing them to land all over the place. This way, he could use the Hiraishin sporadically and Naruto wouldn't be able to tell where he was coming from. Minato smirked as he teleported to one of his kunai and quickly realized he was in the ideal position to strike. So he took the initiative and struck him in the back from the side of the pillar he was on. However, to his surprise, Naruto easily avoided his attack as well as the few punches and kicks that followed. On that last kick, Naruto grabbed the man's foot and used his explosive release to blow it off, leaving Minato with nothing more than a bloody stump. Of course, the man yelled in pain, but his leg had been blown up, so it was understandable to everyone who witnessed this. Naruto took out another syringe and injected it into Minato, who growled and then vanished via Hiraishin. The man needed to think up a proper plan to end the life of this brat, but there were so many unknown variables that were working against him right now that he didn't quite know how to do it. He had no idea Naruto was summoning his own blood, which was pulling down his cane towards the skull at the end. He shaped it into the scythe he preferred and swung it 360 degrees, slicing all the pillars at the base and causing them to topple. Minato struggled to find balance in this arena because the majority of it was in shambles. But, as he struggled to find his footing, he noticed Onoki and a close together in the crowd. If he was going to die, He might as well end the lives of his old rivals, so he took an explosive kunai from his pouch to throw at them, but he never got the chance because his body was grabbed by Naruto's wires and dragged down to the ground hard. He never hit the ground, though, because Naruto slammed his steel-skinned fist into the man's chest so hard that his ribs were nearly shattered by the impact. The man flew towards the wall, hitting it hard as he vomited blood, but before he flew, he dropped his explosive kunai, which Naruto picked up and threw into Minato's chest before detonating it. Many people puked as they witnessed the man's chest being blown open, revealing his organs as they began to spill out. Yet again, Naruto saved the man's life by injecting him with the same concoction he had done 3 times before. Everyone could hear Minato's screams as he felt his body reset itself from the inside, which was excruciatingly painful. Minato looked at Naruto after about 3 minutes of painful regeneration, but while the murderous rage that had never left them since the beginning of this fight remained, there was a trace of fear that Naruto clearly saw. The man had attempted and failed to kill him twice before. Not only that, but he had been killed in the previous attack and was only alive because of Naruto's intervention for reasons he was unsure of right now. Minato knew that with his current equipment, he would most likely lose, so he needed to flee and plan his revenge. Sure, he'd be labeled a missing nin, but he was already marked for death, and he was an SS rank threat in the bingo book, so he knew he'd get by for a while. He'd be fine as long as he could end Naruto's life with his own hands. So, with the intention of fleeing, he threw a kunai as far as he could outside the arena, or at least attempted to. Teched, Naruto smirked as he pointed towards Minato. The kunai came to a halt in midair, turned around, and shot at Minato, who just barely avoided it because, while he wasn't expecting it, his instincts were still sharp. "Are you trying to flee, Minato?" Thumbs down. To think that the man so many people fear that they flee from him is himself fleeing from an opponent. What irony. Naruto then pointed again at Minato, and this time all of the various tri-pronged kunai shot out of the rubble surrounding them, this time towards Minato himself. The man attempted to avoid them all, but he was unable to do so because there were far too many. He could still live because the piercings were all in non-vital areas. He yanked them from his body and prepared to use the Rasengan against the brat right then and there, but even though he was able to conjure the jutsu into his hand, he then fell forward and coughed loudly as blood began to pool out of his mouth. "Oh goody," Naruto said with a clap of his hands, "it appears that the side effects are starting to affect you." "What have you done to me?" Minato yelled in agony before puking blood. The frightening thing about it was that it wasn't crimson, but rather black. "That concoction I mentioned before," Naruto smirked, "is the reason why it failed. It does what it is supposed to do in terms of healing your body from some of the most severe injuries, but the problem is that 24 hours later, your body begins to rot from the inside out, and what is happening to you occurs. Because I injected you with multiple doses of the substance, the end result was only accelerated. Minato, you were never going to live beyond today, and the moment you drank that first one, you were screwed and living on borrowed time." Minato lay on the ground in excruciating pain as the blood within him began to boil. He was well aware that Naruto was doing this on purpose to prolong his agony, but he also had a hidden ace up his sleeve. Minato, like many men around the world, feared death, but what he feared more was that if he was killed, the person who killed him would become more famous than himself. Minato was a self-centered man who was more concerned with his own image than with his family. While he knew he would die eventually and that there was nothing he could do about it, he did have a plan for when someone tried to kill him like this. The method entailed striking a deal with the Shinigami itself, but the cost would be his soul if he chose this path. But it didn't bother him because it wouldn't just be his own soul that would be taken, but also the souls of his opponents. And in the end, he'd be the one laughing the loudest because he'd deny the person who killed him the ability to die and go either up or down depending on their actions in life. So, now that he was nearly dead, he used what strength he had to make the hand signs to perform his final jutsu in his life. Naruto had turned around as he drew a cigarette to observe the man's agonizing death. He could have simply killed him from the start, but as he stated, the man had to pay for all the lives he had ordered slaughtered. However, his instincts kicked in and told him to turn around. You don't become an SS rank threat in the bingo book unless you have a trick for situations like this. And, as he had suspected, Minato ended his hand gestures with a cruel smirk on his face, which caused Naruto to raise an eyebrow in confusion. That confused expression changed to one of pain as he felt his chest stabbed by a ghostly arm of some kind. The crowd was stunned to see this, but even more so when the sky darkened slightly and the Shinigami appeared. It had pushed its arm through Minato to reach Naruto, and the young man was in pain like he hadn't felt since his impromptu brain surgery in which he had injected himself with the means to counter the Yamanaka family jutsu. This made him realize that, even if he had tampered with his own nerves to prevent pain, this was his literal soul feeling the pain, and there was no surgery that could stop it. Haku and Kuretsuchi both called out his name as they saw their beloved literally grasped by the deity of death. This did not bode well for Naruto in their minds. "You stupid worthless boy," Minato raged, his face contorted, "if I'm going to die, I'll take you with me to suffer for eternity." "Haven't you heard, Minato?" Naruto said painfully as the Shinigami began to pull his soul out of his body. "I am the surgeon of death, and I am capable of doing things deemed impossible." Naruto then summoned Kyuubi from within, who answered his summons and fulfilled his end of the bargain the two of them had made. Naruto silently prayed that this worked because if it didn't, he was screwed because even with his abilities, he was stuck right now because the deity had a firm grip on his soul. Kyuubi willingly injected his chakra into Naruto, so while the process was painful for him, it was nowhere near as painful as having his soul ripped out. The Shinigami's hold on his soul was broken by the sudden influx of power, and he saw the deity's hand retract from his chest and back into Minato's. In his rage at nearly losing his soul, Naruto had become enveloped in a dark nearly blood-red aura of chakra, his eyes changing into the Mangekyo Sharingan. The influx of power pulsed out of him in such a way that the immediate area cracked due to how concentrated it was. Naruto's rage had reached a boiling point at this point because, despite losing, the man chose the path of a bitter loser and attempted to kill him with a suicidal attack. While he was no expert in jutsu or the like, he was aware that summoning the Shinigami required the user's soul to be activated. The people in the arena felt the full force of Naruto's haki, with many looking upon him and seeing a monstrous apparition appear before them. The Inuzuka who had come to watch the fight nearly threw up because they had once been the targets of said apparition and knew how terrifying it was to be targeted by it. Several people began to faint, mostly civilians and the weaker shinobi, their mouths foaming as they lost consciousness. Even Kuretsuchi and Haku could feel his rage. It brought them to tears to feel his rage and to realize that he had been holding back so much emotion to allow it to become this way. Onoki was terrified, but thankful that he wasn't Naruto's enemy. If Minato could do so much damage with his one signature jutsu all those years ago, he could only imagine the devastation Naruto would cause if he ever thought to do something like that. Minato was becoming weaker by the second as the entity began to rip his soul out, which wasn't helped by the fact that his body was rapidly degrading, and he was glaring and scowling in rage that Naruto had managed to counter his final trump card. It was a mystery how he had done it because it made no sense. But then he screamed in agony as he felt his own chest being pierced through the front, adding to the Shinigami's agony. Naruto had hardened his hand with his steel release and literally penetrated Minato's chest with it. He was using this to spread his infectious blood so that Minato couldn't fight back and any other plans he had in his head were put on hold. "This is for the lives you've destroyed," Naruto raged, "for my mother, for the innocent children you've ordered killed. Finally, for me, the son you despised and abandoned." Minato was in excruciating pain right now, as the blood that had spread throughout his body as a result of Naruto's impaled hand stiffened him to the point where he couldn't counter him in any way. "Feel the consequences of your actions, and suffer for eternity at the hands of the entity you summoned to kill me." Knife Gamma. The people in the stands had to look away because the sheer amount of power he put into his ability was blinding. After all was said and done, The screams they heard Minato yell would ring in their ears for a while, but after what seemed like hours but was only about a minute, the area was no longer bathed in a green-tinted light so they could see what had happened. To be honest, the adults who had come to see what would happen were all relieved they had left their children at home because what they saw would have haunted their dreams for years if they had seen what was in front of them. Minato Namikaze. The once great man who had such renown throughout the lands and was feared by the majority of those he faced, was no longer alive. That alone was not frightening because even the most famous people die, but Minato's death was not natural. What they saw was the man's entire body, up to his neck, blackened to a crisp. Above his neck, however, things were different because they saw the top of his head popped out like something had burst out of it, which in a way it did because Naruto's attack had caused Minato's head to explode from the top. He then took his hand out of the man's chest because the man was dead and he no longer needed it there. He then kicked the man backwards into the hole he had dug prior to the fight. To be honest, he hadn't noticed it because there was rubble everywhere when he kicked the now dead man, but it was as if the gods had placed him in the ideal location. Minato's body fell in, the lower half collapsing like charcoal, leaving only the head in one piece. Naruto spat into the hole, then used his shambles to move the dirt back into the hole and compact it so that it was solid as if he hadn't dug it up in the first place. Naruto stood there for a moment as he dispelled the room he had created, so many emotions racing through his mind, but in the end, tears welled up in his eyes as the joy of completing his vengeance took precedence. So many years of planning had finally paid off, and it was all over. Our vengeance is complete, Mother, Naruto said aloud to himself, wiping away tears with a handkerchief. May your soul now know peace. With those words, Naruto turned around and began to walk away from this place for the last time in his life, knowing that he would never return after today, but he did stop as he began to walk away. He knelt and picked up his hat, which had been blown off his head in the heat of battle, at what point he couldn't tell you because he didn't know. Epilogue. Years had passed since that fateful day when Naruto finally exacted his vengeance, and life had been good for the now elderly doctor. He lay on his deathbed at the ripe old age of 127, smiling because he had lived a good life. He had taken proper care of his body to keep it alive for so long, which surprised many members of his family given his age. And as he lay there, he saw his life up to that point flash before his eyes. After personally killing Minato in such a gruesome manner in front of everyone, he had then left the arena, having accomplished what he had set out to do. Minato was the last person on his list for vengeance, and his death had brought him peace with himself. So he left the village and went back to being the nomadic roaming doctor he had been for most of his life. Despite the fact that he had completed his mission, things were happening in the elemental countries that would change them for the better. When Naruto restored Nagato to his prime, it displeased someone as well as something because it interfered with their plan for the man, which required him to remain powerful but in a weakened near-death state, so that they were nothing more than a glass cannon to use before discarding. Obito, the man hidden in the shadows, had attempted to kill Nagato and steal the Rinnegan eyes he possessed because he was no longer that way. Obito, on the other hand, failed because Nagato was far more powerful in his prime than Obito realized given that he only knew the man when he was trapped in his life support device. So, after a hard-fought battle, Obito lay slain before Nagato, and with that, Nagato reflected back on Naruto's words about future advice and saw the wisdom in it. So he disbanded the Akatsuki, which had only about 2 other members at this point, and began to improve AIM itself, which he eventually accomplished alongside his future wife Konan. But, while Obito was killed, Zetsu had other plans and vanished to try to complete them elsewhere. While Naruto had put an end to Orochimaru's life, the man's assistant Kabuto still lived and carried on where his former master had left off. Zetsu approached him, and the two formed a partnership that would cause various nations to join forces to fight it. They worked for 3 years, but during that time they gathered an army of white Zetsu as well as the resurrected bodies of the most infamous and powerful shinobi and kunoichi they could find. Kabuto eventually unleashed this massive army on the world, causing significant damage to the surrounding towns before word of what they were dealing with spread. So a cage summit was called, with the legendary medic Nin Tsunade herself taking the seat of Hokage. Many people on the outside thought it was strange that two highly skilled medical professionals would never meet every now and then, but that is exactly what happened. It was because Tsunade remained in Fire Country, whereas Naruto was a man who traveled all over the world, making it difficult to pin him down. However, it was discovered that there was another reason that only increased the likelihood of their meeting. Tsunade was a gambling addict who was also getting too old for her own good. While she was able to conceal her true appearance with her signature jutsu, the fact that she was an elderly woman lingered in the back of her mind. While her gambling addiction was severe, it only worsened as she grew older, but there was a reason for this. She'd heard a rumor, one that piqued her interest, about a procedure known only to the surgeon of death that could restore one's youth. No one could confirm or deny the rumor, and no one knew where it came from, but it existed. According to what she heard, the procedure was extremely expensive, but it worked flawlessly. Tsunade, who was desperate to regain her youth at this point, had been gambling like crazy to raise the funds she needed to do so. And eventually, by the grace of Kami herself, she managed. Once she had the funds, she practically ran away to find Naruto, and it took her several weeks before she learned he had an office in Spring Country and mentally screamed at herself for taking the difficult route instead of just going there. So she went to his office, spoke to the secretary who lived there, who was no longer Yuna because the young lady had set out on her own now that she had finished her schooling to become a doctor, and Naruto had sought out another who had been lost and alone on the streets like Yuna in her youth, and offered them the position so that they could have a place to call home. So the appointment was set, and Naruto eventually met with the woman, who almost demanded to know if the rumors about youth restoration were true. Naruto laughed as she asked, saying he could do something like that once. This was not true, but he wasn't going to tell her so she wouldn't return in the future. The amount of money he was charging for the procedure was not amusing, and people might become desperate enough to commit a slew of illegal acts in order to live longer. He told her the price, which he thought she couldn't afford, but she surprised him by pulling out a scroll with just enough money to cover it. Tsunade then became enraged because her assistant Shizune also pulled out the amount required to complete the procedure. She refused to be the group's old lady, so she wanted to get younger as well. Tsunade was irritated because Shizune had not told her about the massive amount of money she had, which Shizune chuckled and said if she had, Tsunade would have just taken it and gambled it all away selfishly, and Tsunade was then stumped because she had no counter to that. While Tsunade obtained her money through gambling, Shizune had invested it in multiple businesses that turned profits and grew over time to the point where she obtained this money. So, with the money in hand, Naruto took genetic samples from both women, asked if they wanted any changes to their youthful appearance at no extra cost, and both nearly immediately said larger breast sizes, before beginning the cloning process in his hidden room. He told them to return in a month, which confused them because they assumed it was some kind of rare elixir or something, but now they had no idea what he was going to do. He simply told them to return in 1 month and that he would give them what they had paid him for. They left because the man had a reputation for keeping his word no matter what. After quickly knocking the two now young ladies out in a quick room in shambles, they were both in their new younger cloned bodies with naturally larger breasts, which they were overjoyed about. They cried anime tears as they shook his hand before fleeing to have some fun now that their lives were longer. Naruto hadn't really seen them since then because Tsunade and Shizune had never really needed his medical attention. But, after regaining her youthful body, she returned to the village to see how things were going, as it had been a long time since she had visited. Tsunade saw that Kakashi, who had been elected as Hokage, was failing miserably, and she offered to take the position in order to save the village her grandfather had worked so hard to build. Kakashi was more than happy to hand over the position to her because he was not used to dealing with such high levels of responsibility. As a result, Tsunade was appointed Hokage and quickly repaired the village. It just goes to show that she had the ability to do it before, she just didn't want to. So, fast forward to the Cage Summit, where the various cages banded together to fight this great threat, and a massive army was assembled to fight in what became known as the Fourth Shinobi War. Many lives were lost in the battle, with Onoki being the only Kage to die in battle. And just as the allied forces appeared to be winning the battle, a new impediment appeared in the form of Kaguya herself. Zetsu had manipulated Kabuto, as he had Obito, in order to break her free from her prison, and the damage she caused was massive, with nearly 3/5 of the allied forces dying as a result of her strength alone. The only saving grace was that the plan had been to seal up all the Biju and turn them back into the Jubi that they once were so that she could absorb their power, but since 3 of them had gone missing, she only had the power of 6 of them after Zetsu and Kabuto had kidnapped and extracted them. Gaara had been fortunate to have someone resurrect him at the cost of her own life, but the others had not been so fortunate. And I understand what you're thinking right now. Are you guessing Naruto made himself known at this point and helped defeat Kaguya with his insane abilities? If you did, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but that was not the case. During the war, Naruto, Haku, Kuretsuchi, and even Neji and Fu had borrowed an airship from Koyuki and traveled to the west. It wasn't to get away from the war, which they had no idea was happening because it started so suddenly about 2 days after they left, but to fulfill a promise Naruto had made to the Kyuubi itself. When he took the Biju within him, he promised to set him free far out west so that it could live free, and while he was planning to do so, he considered doing the same to the other 2 Biju he knew about who were sealed in Fu and Haku because the further they were from a place that fought over them, the better. So they all set out for the west, where they saw many different things and encountered many different cultures of people. The trip lasted several months before they found the place where the 3 Biju wanted to live. Once that was determined, Naruto used his abilities to separate them from their hosts, allowing them to live their own lives. Fu said a heartfelt goodbye because her Biju had been with her for the majority of her life, whereas the ones in Naruto and Haku had only been sealed within them for a year. There were nods of thanks from them before they all went their separate ways. Returning to the elemental countries was far easier than traveling away from it because they had no idea what was waiting for them out there, but they knew what they were returning to, or so they thought. It wasn't until they returned that they learned about the war, which had lasted only a week and a half. Naruto had been surprised by what had happened, but even more so by who had emerged as the war's main hero. Uchiha Sasuke. Naruto was speechless when he heard that because he never would have guessed it in a million years. The guy was a jerk who didn't appear to be the type to give up his life for the sake of others. But it appears that he did. Nagato had been one of the main forces to face Kaguya, but even he struggled against her. Sasuke won the fight for everyone when he sacrificed himself as a living bomb of all things, rushing forward and blowing himself up point blank. He had lost one of his arms completely in the fighting, and the other was barely usable as it was, so he only had one card to play in the end. This wasn't enough to kill her, but it allowed Kakashi to use his Kamui close enough for Nagato to use one last Shinra Tensai that knocked her into it. Her body vanished as a result, but her head remained. They then went overboard and burned it down until there was nothing left to ensure she was dead. That was the end of the war, and Sasuke was a hero because it was his sacrifice that gave them the opportunity to kill Kaguya. With Sasuke's death, the Uchiha clan came to an end. While he may have found a way to redeem himself in the eyes of the people through his sacrifice, he still won in Naruto's books because he denied Sasuke the chance to continue his legacy and robbed him of all his funds before his death. And it wasn't just Sasuke's life that had changed so drastically. The victims of Naruto's vengeance were all suffering the long-term consequences of his actions. Shino, on the other hand, was thrown out of the clan because, as Naruto had made the poison dew, it was a very powerful insect repellent that made it impossible for him to be near anyone in his own clan lest their own bugs die from being in his proximity. So Shino was humiliated, and the normally level-headed and calm shinobi's mind shattered to the point where it never recovered. Several years later, after attempting to regain his former strength only to fail time and again, he would hang himself in shame, leaving a note cursing Naruto for taking everything from him in this manner. The Pai had cursed Choji. Naruto had cast the witch's hex on him, He remained a member of his clan until his death, which occurred only about 2 years after the war ended. He thought he could easily overcome whatever was wrong with him by eating more than usual, but this put him in a food-related coma. The curse was still in full effect while he was in that state, and he died from it in the hospital. Ino. Well, it was obvious she was fucked for life. Naruto had Haku lobotomize her, and there was no turning back. The fear-inducing drug that had been on those senbon used to perform the procedure, on the other hand, kept her in a permanent nightmare from which she could not awaken. She cried out for someone to save her from the horrors of her mind, but no one came, and even when it appeared that she had broken free and escaped one nightmare, it was just a mental illusion, and the horrors resumed. And she would stay in the hospital for the next 23 years, until her mother and father died. With them gone, no one else in the clan cared enough to continue paying for her medical care, so they cut the cord and she died in that bed. Only then did the nightmares end for good. Hinata had been alive for about 2 years, but after the first one, the poison Naruto had injected her with had finally taken effect, and she began to deteriorate rapidly. She kept trying to train it off, but it didn't work, so she went to the hospital, where she was told that her muscles were degrading at an abnormally fast rate. They couldn't heal her, but they told her that one man could, so she went in search of Naruto himself in order to have him heal her. She made it to his office, but she had to make an appointment because he wasn't there right away. Naruto smirked as he saw her name in the appointment book and realized what was going on, so he texted Neji to come on over, which he did. So Naruto met with Hinata while Neji hid in the back room, leaning against a wall and listening in on their conversation. Hinata begged Naruto to heal her, but Naruto refused. Her arrogance was on display when she demanded that he heal her. Naruto was having serious deja vu here because she was acting exactly like the Kan family when he first met them. But Naruto simply said no and told her to go to hell. In her rage-fueled desperation, she ordered the branch members who had come with her to attack, but they were easily subdued because even with their eyes, they couldn't see the wires he had set up in case this meeting went as planned. Naruto smirked as he explained the situation to Hinata in minute detail. He admitted to her that he was the one who poisoned her and explained why. Her face was red with rage, but it turned white when Neji approached her. She had been told he had been killed so that his organs could be harvested to save her life, but this turned out to be a lie, and what made matters worse was that she could clearly see he no longer had the cage bird seal on his head, so she couldn't subdue him like before. What happened next was simply chalked up to clan matters, as Neji finally got his well-deserved revenge on his cousin, and because her body was too weak to take it, she died in the end. It was never reported as such, however, because Naruto bought the silence of the security detail by simply removing the seal from them completely. He'd helped enough cursed people that he was proficient in extracting all but the most intense versions of them. So the branch members, or former branch members, left his office that day to live their lives elsewhere. He never looked into where they went, but all he knew was that they never returned to Konoha, and Hinata's death was labeled as a missing nin attack, which worked well for him because no one was seeking vengeance on him. Shikimaru was the only surviving clan heir who had not been taken advantage of. Sure, his father died in the war, but he then took up the mantle left vacant by his father's death and became less lazy as a result. Finally, he began dating Gaara's older sister Temari, which led to their marriage and the birth of a son. Given their extreme differences, no one knew how those two met in the first place, but love was a strange thing at times. But now we come back to Naruto. So, after returning from his journey out west, Naruto spent the next few weeks healing people's wounds because there were plenty of them after the war, and after things had settled down, he continued to do as the wandering doctor he had been known as. Kuretsuchi returned to Iwa to take over as Kage after her grandfather died in battle, but she still made time for Naruto when he visited. A year later, Naruto married both Haku and Kuretsuchi, and a few weeks later, they were both confirmed pregnant with his child, as was another person. Naruto agreed to become the patriarch of a newly formed clan in order to be with both Haku and Kuretsuchi without being judged negatively by the masses. Because he was the only male in a clan, the Clan Restoration Act came into effect, which stated that said male could have multiple wives in order to increase the size of his clan so that it was no longer on the verge of extinction. However, becoming an official clan required the support of a daimyo from a major country. And therein lies the problem, because the daimyos of the various countries would almost certainly require him to settle down in their respective shinobi villages before making his clan official. However, luck had always been on Naruto's side, and the solution to his predicament had come in the form of the daimyo Koyuki herself. He was already a citizen of a major country, and she was its daimyo. And because they didn't have a shinobi village, he was still free to roam around as he had been. But then there was the condition. Koyuki desired a child because she required an heir to take the throne from her in the future, and she desired it from only one man. And, much to the chagrin of his other two lovers, it was Naruto with whom she desired a child. Both Haku and Kurasuchi had initially told her no, but Koyuki had simply smirked because she was the only daimyo willing to offer him clan status without the hidden strings requiring him to ally with one specific village. And because they couldn't argue with that, they eventually caved. She didn't want to marry him. All she wanted was a child, which he delivered in the form of a daughter the following year. Both Haku and Kurasuchi gave birth to children, with Haku having a son and Kurasuchi having a girl. He adored all of his children and made time for them. He continued to travel to heal others for a few more years after their birth, but then he decided to use his money to build a school and begin training others to be the best medics they could be. People would come from all over to learn from him in this manner. Those who graduated from his class became well known for their medical skills all over the world over the years. His daughter, the one born from Kuratsuchi, whom he named Mocha after his mother had wanted to become a kunoichi like her mother, with whom he had no quarrels, as well as his son, whom he named Zabuza in honor of the man who had died in the war alongside Mei. The daughter he had with Koyuki had, of course, been groomed to become the new daimyo of Spring, so this came as no surprise. He watched his children over the years to make sure they were okay given his mixed genetics, and they were surprisingly stronger for it. The various bloodlines he'd spliced into his genetic code in order to use them had been passed down to all three of them, but with two caveats. He would have said 3, but because the ability he gained from the devil fruit was not genetic, there was no way to pass it on. The first was his ability to bend blood. This surprised him because he had always wondered what would happen there, but after learning that they did not have the same ability to use their blood as he did, he looked into the matter personally. What he discovered surprised him. He had been injected with parasitic blood all those years before. It appears that it drained the host dry before infecting the next target, whatever that might be. Naruto had no way of knowing for sure, but he assumed it was Faust's blood that had somehow strengthened his body enough to control the parasitic blood rather than it killing him. It appeared to be under his control until he died. So he made sure to save some of his own blood for the future and froze it in a special container deep in the freezer so it wouldn't go bad. The summoning of the doorway to his private operating room was the second ability they couldn't use. That one he couldn't answer because the fact that he could do it in the first place defied logic, and he didn't have the scientific tools to figure it out. So he dismissed it as bad luck. While his children did not have those abilities, they did have the multiple other bloodlines he had spliced into his genes, and they each had their own Sharingan, but the strange thing was that theirs were blue rather than red like the original. He was always concerned about his children's safety, knowing that there would be plenty of people eager to get their hands on someone with multiple bloodlines within them, and he would be damned if he didn't stop their attempts at the source itself. And, as he had predicted, there were a few attempts, but in the end, he reminded those who dared to harm his family why he was known as the Surgeon of Death. He lived for so long, with Koyuki dying at the age of 87 and Kuratsuchi dying at the age of 93. Naruto's genetics, on the other hand, kept him in relatively good shape until the end, as did Haku's. The bloodline that ran through her genetics appeared to slow down the aging process even more than he did. He was overjoyed to see his family grow and do great things in the world, as well as the numerous people he had taught to the best of their abilities. But, while that was all well and good, none of them stood out as worthy of receiving the true source of his power because none of them aspired to be doctors like he was in his prime. But that changed near the end of his life when he met his great-great-grandson, whom he named Naruto after himself. The boy would sit there and listen to his stories about the past and his own adventures. He saw that spark in the boy's eyes that indicated he was truly interested in becoming a doctor, as he had been in his prime, and so he spent his last few years teaching little Naruto as much as he could, which, while not everything, was still quite a lot. But as he lay on his deathbed with his wife Haku by his side, he held onto a chest that contained the numerous journals he had kept his entire life with all the things he had experimented with, as well as two other things. One was a simple apple, which may seem strange to include, but Naruto had learned from Law's journal that when a devil fruit user died, the power transferred itself into the nearest fruit and transformed it into the foul-tasting source of power that Naruto himself had eaten when he was only 7. The irony here was that his great-great-grandson was also 7, and while he was present, the rest of his family was not. It wasn't out of malice, but because they were too far away to reach him in time to see him in his final moments. Naruto's final act before passing away was to pull out his hat, which he had made and kept in pristine condition for the majority of his life, and place it on the younger Naruto's head. "The surgeon of death lives on through you." Those were his final words, but he passed away with a smile on his face. Haku sobbed as she took her husband's chest from his grasp and then used her bloodline to paralyze the young man. It was her husband's final request, and while it was strange, she would do as he asked because he was never one to hurt his family, so she trusted there was a reason for this. She injected the young man with the blood Naruto had stored in a syringe that she had opened. The blood seeped into his system, and as it had done so many times before, it strengthened the boy with power that was unique to him alone now that he had access to blood-bending abilities as well as the interdimensional operating room. With a heavy heart, Naruto accepted the chest given to him, but he then went to his room and opened the letter that was on top of it. The letter went into great detail about the contents of the chest as well as what his wife had injected into him. Naruto had sobbed as he witnessed his elder entrusting him with such power, and as he noticed the key taped to the letter. He used it to open the chest and discover the strange fruit inside. He took a deep breath, because the letter said it tasted like nothing words could ever describe, and then ate it. The older Naruto had not lied about the taste, but he ate the entire foul thing until there was nothing left. And, as in the past, the young man felt sick and passed out as the devil fruit changed another user. Naruto awoke in the morning and looked deeper into the chest that had been left for him. Within it, he found all of his journals, as well as his cane and the gloves he used to wear, with the wires still attached and strong. Naruto took these items and walked out the back door to put his newfound power to use. He cried a little as he clutched the hat he had been given because the history infused into this one piece of clothing was priceless, but in the end he put it on his head and wiped the tears from his eyes because he had been chosen to carry on his elder's legacy. Haku saw him through the back window as she prepared breakfast for the young boy, and she couldn't help but see a younger version of her husband in him as he smiled and twirled his newly acquired cane like Naruto had done so many times before. This made Haku's eyes well up. The legacy of the surgeon of death endured.
So that's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the channel for more awesome stories like this. Thank you. See you all in my next video.